There's a reason they put bracelets on babies born in hospitals. I am that reason. In 1968, on a tired and careless night, I mixed up two newborns. One was my daughter's baby. Now, years later, my granddaughter needs a bone marrow transplant, and I'm forced to reveal this terrible secret. My name is Margaret Williams, but everyone calls me Maggie. I worked as a nurse at Memorial General Hospital in Springfield for over 40 years. I was there when they introduced electronic medical records, when they built the new East Wing, when they changed the color of our uniforms from white to baby blue. I saw thousands of babies come into this world. I held them in my arms, cleaned them, wrapped them in those little striped hospital blankets, and handed them to their mamas. I was good at my job, at least, that's what everyone believed. December 14, 1968 was the night that changed everything. We had a terrible snowstorm, and half the staff couldn't make it to the hospital. The roads were buried under 18 inches of snow, and the wind howled like a wounded animal outside the windows. I was working a double shift, already on my 16th hour. My eyes were heavy, my mind foggy from too much coffee and too little sleep. That night, two baby girls were born within 20 minutes of each other. One to my daughter Ellen, who had gotten pregnant right out of high school, and was raising the baby alone. Ellen was just 18, scared and brave all at once. Her boyfriend Tommy had enlisted in the army, and was already in Vietnam when she found out she was expecting. She never told him about the baby. She said she didn't want him distracted over there, where boys were dying every day. But I knew the truth. She was afraid he'd reject her, reject their child. Later we would learn that Tommy never made it home from Khe Sanh. The other baby was born to a woman named Diana Blackwood, who came from the wealthy part of town, with her husband James in their brand new Cadillac. The Blackwoods owned half the businesses in Springfield. James was a banker, always dressed in expensive suits, and Diana wore pearls even while in labor. They'd been trying for a baby for 10 years, and this was their miracle. Back then, our nursery system was nothing like today's secure setups. Both infants were immediately fitted with identification bracelets at birth. Thin plastic bands with handwritten cards slipped inside. One for the wrist, one for the ankle. Hospital protocol was strict. The bracelets stayed on until the babies went home with their mothers. But what the protocol couldn't account for was human exhaustion and a moment of terrible confusion. Both babies had been cleaned, weighed, and placed in identical clear bassinets in the nursery. They wore standard-issue white knit caps and were wrapped in similar white hospital blankets. Both had dark baby fuzz for hair. Both had the scrunched pink faces of newborns. In the dim lighting of the nursery that night, they looked remarkably similar. I had placed them carefully in their assigned spots. Ellen's baby in the bassinet, marked Williams on the left side of the nursery. Diana's baby in the bassinet marked Blackwood on the right. Standard procedure. Everything was correct. Then, a code blue was called in room 304. The attending nurse had slipped on ice in the parking lot and broken her ankle, so we were already short-staffed. "Maggie, we need you now," someone shouted from the hallway. I rushed to help, leaving both bassinets in the nursery. When I returned 15 minutes later, I found that someone, another nurse, a doctor checking on the babies. I never learned who had moved the bassinets. They'd been shifted around to make room for an incubator that had been wheeled in for another infant. The two bassinets were now in different positions than where I'd left them. The name cards that had been clipped to the bassinets had somehow gotten separated in the commotion. Ellen's baby was supposed to go to room 20. Diana Blackwood's baby was supposed to go to room 20. But now, with the bassinets moved and the name cards missing, I wasn't certain which baby was which. The bracelets would tell me, of course, but in my exhausted state, I made a split-second decision. Rather than checking the bracelets carefully under the light, I simply looked at the bassinet positions and made an assumption about which baby belonged where. I wheeled one bassinet to room 212 and the other to room 217. It wasn't until I was halfway down the hall with the second baby that a terrible thought struck me. What if I'd gotten it backwards? What if when the bassinets were moved, I'd misremembered their original positions? I told myself it was fine. The bracelets were on the babies. The mothers would check them. But deep down, I knew I should go back. Should verify, should be absolutely certain. Instead, I delivered the second baby and said nothing about my doubt. I still remember the sound of those bassinet wheels on the linoleum floor. Two innocent babies who might have gone home with the wrong families, all because of my exhausted assumption. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was what I did next. Nothing. I said nothing. And now, over 50 years later, that silence might cost my granddaughter her life. Or at least, the girl I've always thought of as my granddaughter. What I didn't know then was that a tiny birthmark I would notice within weeks would later fuel my worst fears, and that decades later, when death came knocking, I would finally have to face what I'd done. I realized what I might have done about an hour after the babies were delivered to their mothers. Standing at the nurse's station, filling out paperwork, a cold feeling washed over me like I'd stepped outside into that December snow. Had I delivered the right babies to the right rooms? I'd been so sure in the moment, but now doubt crept in like ice water through my veins. I should have reported it immediately. That's what any responsible nurse would have done. I could have quietly checked the bracelets against the room numbers, verified everything was correct. If there had been an error, we could have fixed it within hours before anyone knew. But I froze. Ellen had already bonded with the baby she held. She was so happy despite all the hardship she'd faced. She'd dropped out of school, been kicked out by her father, moved in with me. That baby was the only bright spot in her world. And the Blackwoods, they were already making plans for their perfect daughter's perfect life. They'd brought a pink cashmere blanket for her, had a nursery painted by some fancy decorator. Were talking about trust funds and private schools while the baby was barely an hour old. How could I tell them what I might have done? I'd lose my job, my reputation. The hospital might get sued. Ellen would be devastated. The Blackwoods would be furious. No, I told myself. It would cause too much pain to too many people. Besides, I wasn't even completely sure I had mixed them up. Maybe the babies were exactly where they should be. Maybe my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew there was a real possibility I had made a terrible mistake. I told myself I would find a way to be certain. But days passed, then weeks, and soon it was too late. The babies had settled into their homes, their families had fallen in love with them. How could I tear them away based on a suspicion, a fear that might not even be founded? So I stayed silent. I watched as Ellen struggled to make ends meet, working as a waitress while taking night classes to finish high school. I babysat little Chloe whenever Ellen needed me, which was often. I changed her diapers, sang her lullabies, rocked her to sleep. It was during one of those diaper changes, when Chloe was just 3 weeks old, that I noticed it. A small birthmark behind her right ear. A tiny light brown patch shaped like a crescent moon. It was barely visible, usually covered by the fine baby hair, but once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I knew I should have felt nothing. Many babies have birthmarks, but something about this one unsettled me. Over the next few months, I found excuses to check on the Blackwood baby Victoria at the pediatrician's office where I sometimes filled in. I watched for any sign of that same birthmark. I never saw it. Of course, the birthmark could have come from Tommy, Chloe's father, or so we all believed at the time, or from some distant relative in Ellen's family I'd never met. It proved nothing, but it fed my suspicions, kept them alive year after year. Meanwhile, I caught glimpses of Victoria around town, at the park where her nanny would bring her to play, at the pharmacy, at church. I'd find excuses to go over and observe her. Was there something familiar in her features? Could I see traces of Ellen in her face? But babies change so quickly in those early months, their features constantly evolving. Any resemblance I thought I saw could have been my guilty imagination. Years passed. Chloe grew into a sweet, determined little girl, who loved books and always tried to help Ellen around our small apartment. Victoria became the princess of Springfield, always in pretty dresses, taking ballet lessons by age 3. 2 girls, born on the same night, living completely different lives, and possibly in the wrong families because of me. Still, I kept my secret. What good would it do to disrupt these children's lives? They were happy, loved, thriving in their respective families. And with each passing year, it became harder and harder to imagine revealing the truth. So I carried my burden in silence, watching these two girls grow up from afar, wondering if I had altered the courses of their lives forever with my careless mistake on that snowy night. And I might have carried this secret to my grave if not for what happened in early 2024 when everything finally caught up with me. 3 months ago, in February 2024, when Chloe turned 56 years old, when the past came knocking on my door, demanding to be acknowledged, when I learned that sometimes secrets don't just hurt the soul, they can kill the body too. How could I have known that the word leukemia would force me to finally unravel the web of lies I'd been spinning for over half a century? The years went by, and I watched both girls grow up. My daughter's child, who might possibly be Diana Blackwood's biological daughter, was named Chloe. She was raised in our modest home on Maple Street, went to Springfield High, and worked part-time at the Dairy Queen since she was 16. She was smart and hardworking, just like Ellen, and eventually became a fourth-grade teacher at the same elementary school she'd attended as a child. Chloe had Ellen's determination and my practicality, but there were differences in her appearance that sometimes raised questions. While Ellen and I both had green eyes, Chloe's were a deep brown. Ellen had naturally wavy hair, while Chloe's was straight as a pin. People would sometimes remark on this, and Ellen would laugh and say, "She must take after her daddy," if only they knew the terrible possibility that haunted me. When Chloe was 7, Ellen married a kind man named Bill Henderson, who worked at the auto plant. He adopted Chloe legally and gave her his last name. They had 2 more children together, Chloe's siblings, though possibly not by blood. Our family grew and my secret seemed less important with each passing year. Chloe was happy, loved, thriving. That was what mattered, wasn't it? The other girl, Victoria, was raised by the Blackwoods with every privilege money could buy. Private school at St. Margaret's Academy, horseback riding lessons, summer camps in Martha's Vineyard. From a distance I watched her grow into a beautiful, privileged young woman, driving her convertible Mustang to cheerleading practice. I noticed that Victoria had green eyes, like Ellen and me. Was that just coincidence, or evidence of our connection? Her hair was wavy too, unlike Diana's sleek black hair or James's thinning straight hair. But again, these traits could have come from other family members, from grandparents I'd never seen. I couldn't be certain. The Blackwoods had struggled with secondary infertility after Victoria. They'd conceived her naturally after years of trying, a miracle they'd thought. When Matthew came along 3 years later, it was another unexpected blessing. The doctors never did figure out why their fertility was so unpredictable. Matthew had the same dark brown eyes as his mother Diana, the same strong jaw as his father James. He was unmistakably a Blackwood. And if my suspicions were correct, he was the biological brother of Chloe, not Victoria. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was better this way. Both girls were loved. Both had good lives, just different ones. What good would it do to disrupt their worlds? So I kept my secret. Year after year, decade after decade, I retired from nursing, became a widow when my Henry passed from a heart attack, moved into a smaller house. Life went on. I did have moments of weakness. When Chloe was 12 and had pneumonia, I wondered if her biological family's medical history might be important for her doctors to know. When Victoria was featured in the local paper for winning a regional piano competition, I cut out the article and kept it hidden in my Bible. I'd look at it sometimes, wondering if her musical talent came from Ellen's side of the family. My father had been quite the piano player in his day. There was one time I almost broke my silence. Victoria was about 16, and I saw her arguing with Diana in the parking lot of the grocery store. Diana slapped her, not hard, but it shocked me. I wanted to run over there, to protect her, to tell Diana she had no right to hit this girl who might be my biological granddaughter. But of course I had no proof, only suspicions. I had no rights to Victoria at all. Victoria and Chloe crossed paths occasionally. Springfield isn't a huge town. They went to different schools, moved in different circles, but they must have seen each other at the mall, at the movie theater, at town events. Did they ever feel a strange connection? Did they ever notice the odd coincidence that they were born on the same day, in the same hospital? I'll never know. What I do know is that my possible mistake all those years ago may have created two parallel lives, two roads diverging from a single point. And now, decades later, those roads were about to converge again, in a way none of us could have imagined. Chloe eventually married a man named Tom Mitchell, and became Chloe Mitchell. She'd gone through life with 3 different last names: Williams, Henderson, Mitchell, never knowing that her biological last name should have been Blackwood. Victoria married Jack Patterson, a surgeon at Memorial Hospital, and professionally used the name Victoria Blackwood Patterson. She became a successful attorney with her own practice, Patterson and Associates, though she kept the Blackwood name in recognition of the parents who had raised her. After all these years, the truth, or at least my suspicions, was finally going to come out. And it would start with 3 terrifying words: "You have leukemia." But it wasn't just Chloe's life hanging in the balance. It was our entire family's identity, and the terrible possibility that the only person who could save her was a brother she never knew she had. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed. Chloe, now 56, was diagnosed with leukemia. She needed a bone marrow transplant, and the doctors at Springfield Memorial were looking for family matches. Ellen was tested but wasn't compatible. They asked about other blood relatives. The diagnosis came out of nowhere. Chloe had been feeling tired, bruising easily, running fevers that wouldn't break. She thought it was just stress from teaching, maybe early menopause. By the time she went to the doctor, the cancer was already advanced. Acute myeloid leukemia, they called it. I remembered that term from my nursing days. It wasn't good. I sat with her during that first appointment. When the doctor explained the treatment plan: chemotherapy first, to try to put the cancer into remission. Then, ideally, a bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor. Family members were always the first choice, the doctor explained. Siblings had a 25% chance of being a match. Parents, somewhat less. The closer the genetic connection, the better. Ellen went to be tested immediately. So did Bill, though the doctor said step-parents were rarely matches. Chloe's half-siblings were tested too. Everyone in the family wanted to help, was desperate to do something, anything. I sat there in the waiting room while they had their blood drawn, my heart pounding in my chest. If my suspicions were correct, if Chloe was actually Diana Blackwood's biological daughter, then Ellen wouldn't be a match. None of them would, because Chloe wouldn't be biologically related to any of us. "Mom, do you think my father might help?" Chloe asked Ellen one evening while I was visiting. We were sitting around Ellen's kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases and graduations. The table where Chloe had done her homework, where she'd announced her engagement, where she'd told us about her teaching job. Now it was where we gathered to talk about her cancer. "I know you don't like talking about him," Chloe continued, "but this is my life we're talking about." Ellen looked uncomfortable. She'd always told Chloe that her father was Tommy, the young soldier who died in Vietnam before he could know he had a daughter. It was a story that had become truth through repetition, a narrative that gave Chloe a father to honor rather than uncertainty. "I don't think we can find him, honey," Ellen said softly, squeezing Chloe's hand. "Tommy died in Vietnam. You know that." "Well, what about other relatives from his side? Anyone?" Chloe was desperate, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. The chemotherapy had already taken her hair, left her skin pale and translucent. She looked so fragile sitting there. This woman who had always been so strong. I sat there at Ellen's kitchen table, my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of my suspicion crushing me. If Chloe was going to find a match, it might not be in our family, not if my worst fears were true. It was then that I first seriously considered the possibility that the Blackwoods might be her biological family. If that were true, then Matthew, Diana, and James's biological son, might be Chloe's full biological brother. He might be a match for her bone marrow. But there was still the question of whether my suspicions were even correct. I had never been 100% certain that I had switched the babies. It had been a possibility that haunted me for decades, but not a certainty. And now, with Chloe's life at stake, I needed to know the truth once and for all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my small living room, weighing my options. If I spoke up now, I would have to admit that I'd kept this terrible secret for 56 years. I would have to confess to Ellen, to Chloe, to the Blackwoods, that I might have robbed them all of their rightful families. I would face their anger, their shock, possibly even legal repercussions. But if I stayed silent, and Chloe died because she couldn't find a matching donor, how could I live with myself then? I had to find out the truth. But I couldn't just blurt out my suspicions without any proof. I needed to confirm whether Chloe and Victoria had indeed been switched at birth before I threw everyone's lives into chaos. The next morning, I made a decision. I would try to get DNA samples, not from Chloe and Victoria, but from Chloe and Ellen. If Chloe was Ellen's biological daughter, my suspicions were unfounded. If she wasn't, then I would know for certain that I had made the switch all those years ago. As I looked at Chloe's calendar on Ellen's fridge marking chemotherapy appointments, at the pill organizers and medical paperwork scattered across the counter, I knew my time was running out. I had to act quickly. And really, when I put it that way, was it even a choice at all? Little did I know that collecting DNA samples would be the easy part. The hardest challenge was still to come. Looking into the eyes of the woman who was actually my biological granddaughter, and telling her that her entire life had been built on my lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my small living room, looking at old photographs in frames and albums. There was Chloe as a baby in her pink onesie, as a toddler with pigtails at the county fair, graduating from high school in her cap and gown, at her wedding at First Baptist Church. She was my granddaughter in every way that mattered. I had held her hand when she took her first steps, baked her birthday cakes with rainbow sprinkles, attended every school play and softball game. I loved her with all my heart. But now her life was at stake, and my secret might stand in the way of her survival. I pulled out my old photo albums, the ones that chronicled our family history. There was Ellen, as a baby, with my green eyes and her father's dimpled chin. There was Henry and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful. There was Ellen's graduation, before she got pregnant, when the future still seemed wide open. And then there was Chloe, filling page after page with her childhood milestones. I studied those photos of Chloe carefully, looking for any resemblance to the Blackwoods. Her brown eyes, so unlike our family's green ones. Her straight hair, when everyone in my family had waves, that birthmark behind her ear. Had I ever seen anything like it in the Blackwood family? I couldn't be sure. I needed proof, one way or the other. I needed to know if my suspicions were correct, before I turned everyone's lives upside down. But how could I get DNA samples to test? Then I realized I didn't need to test Chloe against Victoria. I needed to test Chloe against Ellen. If Chloe was Ellen's biological daughter, my suspicions were unfounded. If she wasn't, then I would know for certain that I had made the switch all those years ago. The thought of sneaking DNA from my own daughter made me ill, but this was Chloe's life we were talking about. I had to know the truth. The next day, I visited Chloe's apartment, bringing her some homemade soup. As expected, she was exhausted from her latest round of chemo. I convinced her to lie down while I tidied up a bit. "You're an angel, Grandma," she said, her voice weak but grateful. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Here she was, thanking me, trusting me, while I was sneaking around behind her back. But I reminded myself why I was doing this. To help her. To save her life if possible. While she napped, I found her hairbrush. There were a few strands of hair caught in the bristles. Not many, since the chemotherapy had taken most of her hair. but hopefully enough. I carefully collected them in a small plastic bag I'd brought for this purpose, feeling like the worst kind of thief. The harder part was getting Ellen's DNA. I couldn't risk taking something from her home. She might notice. Instead, I invited her to my house for lunch the following day. After we ate, while she used the bathroom, I carefully retrieved her drinking glass and placed it in a plastic bag. I hated myself for the deception, but I had to know. I couldn't use the hospital lab. Too many questions. Too much risk to my friend Sarah. Instead, I found a private DNA testing service online, one that advertised confidential paternity testing, Gene Trust DNA services, they were called. I packaged the samples carefully, following their instructions, and sent them off with express shipping. The wait was agonizing. 5 business days, they'd said. 5 days of watching Chloe grow weaker, of seeing Ellen's desperate hope that a family match would be found, of carrying the weight of my terrible secret. On the 6th day, the email arrived. I was sitting in my living room, flipping through TV channels without really seeing anything, when my phone chimed. I opened the email with shaking hands. The results were presented in cold, clinical language. Case number: GT24-1T847. Test type: maternity DNA test. Alleged mother: Sample A, Ellen Williams. Child: Sample B, Chloe Mitchell. Results: the probability of maternity is 0.00%. The tested individuals are not biologically related as mother and child. These results are conclusive to a scientific certainty of 90%. I closed my eyes, letting the confirmation of my fears wash over me. Chloe was not Ellen's biological daughter, which meant Victoria was not Diana and James Blackwood's biological daughter. I had indeed switched those babies 56 years ago. And now that mistake might cost Chloe her life if we couldn't find a matching bone marrow donor. The Blackwoods were the key. If Chloe was truly their biological daughter, then Matthew, their son, born 3 years after Victoria, would be Chloe's full biological brother. He might be able to donate the bone marrow she so desperately needed. But now I had to do the hardest thing: get DNA from Victoria and test it against Ellen to confirm the other half of my theory. I needed to prove not just that Chloe wasn't Ellen's daughter, but that Victoria was. I spent 2 days working up the courage for the next step. I needed Victoria's DNA, and I needed it without raising suspicions. Then I remembered something. Victoria Blackwood Patterson was now a high-profile attorney in Springfield. She had recently been featured in the local paper for winning a major case. The article mentioned that she would be speaking at a charity luncheon at the country club this weekend, a cancer research fundraiser. Ironically enough, I could attend the luncheon. Maybe find a way to get a sample from Victoria. A discarded coffee cup, a water glass, something with her DNA on it. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a start. The charity luncheon was expensive, almost a week's worth of my pension. But this was Chloe's life we were talking about. I would have paid 10 times that amount. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I usually saved for church on Easter Sunday. I felt out of place among the country club crowd, with their designer outfits and perfectly coiffed hair. But I was there for a purpose, not to socialize. Victoria gave a short speech about the importance of cancer research funding. She was poised and articulate, with a natural charisma that commanded attention. I couldn't help but wonder if those qualities came from Ellen, who had always been the smartest, most well-spoken person in any room. After the speeches, there was a buffet lunch. I watched Victoria carefully from my table near the back of the room. She drank from a water glass, ate a salad, dabbed her mouth with a napkin. All potential sources of DNA, if I could get to them before the waitstaff cleared them away. When Victoria got up to speak with someone across the room, leaving her table momentarily unattended, I saw my chance. I walked over, pretending to admire the floral centerpiece, and quickly slipped her used napkin into my purse. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure someone would notice, but no one did. It wasn't until I was driving home, the napkin safely stored in another plastic bag, that I allowed myself to think about what would happen next. I sent Victoria's sample, along with Ellen's stored sample, to GeneTrust DNA Services. This time, I requested expedited processing and paid extra. Another 5 agonizing days of waiting. When the second results came back, they confirmed what I'd suspected. Case number GT 2024 889-2. Test type maternity DNA test. Alleged mother sample A, Ellen Williams. Child sample C, Victoria Blackwood Patterson. Results. The probability of maternity is 99.97%. The tested individuals are biologically related as mother and child. These results are conclusive to a scientific certainty of 9. Victoria Blackwood Patterson was Ellen's biological daughter, and by extension, Chloe was Diana and James Blackwood's biological daughter. I had the proof I needed. Now I had to find the courage to use it. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at those 2 test results printed out on paper. 2 lives, switched at birth. 2 families who had raised children who weren't biologically theirs. And now, 56 years later, the truth was about to come crashing down on all of us. But I had no choice. Chloe's life depended on it. The next morning, I drove my old Buick to the offices of Patterson and Associates, the law firm where Victoria was a senior partner. She had kept the Blackwood name professionally, even after marrying Jack Patterson, using Victoria Blackwood Patterson in her practice. The receptionist looked skeptical when I requested a meeting without an appointment, but I insisted it was a personal matter of grave importance. "Tell her it's Margaret Williams," I said. "I was a nurse at Memorial when she was born." The receptionist made a phone call, spoke in low tones, then looked up at me with surprise. "Miss Blackwood Patterson will see you. Please follow me." 20 minutes later, I was shown into Victoria's elegant corner office. Large windows overlooked downtown Springfield. Law books lined the walls, framed diplomas and awards hung in tasteful arrangements. She rose from behind her large mahogany desk, extending her hand politely. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "what can I do for you today?" Janet said this was urgent. I took a deep breath and began. "Ms. Blackwood Patterson, I have something very difficult to tell you. Something I've kept secret for 56 years. But before I do, I need to ask. Have you ever been tested for any unusual genetic markers? Any medical conditions that don't run in the Blackwood family?" She frowned, clearly confused by this strange opening. "I'm not sure that's any of your business, Mrs. Williams." "Please," I said. "It's important. Life or death important." Something in my face must have convinced her, because after a moment she nodded slowly and sat back down, gesturing for me to take a seat as well. "As a matter of fact, yes. When I was pregnant with my first child, they found that I'm a carrier for a rare blood disorder called thalassemia minor. It doesn't appear anywhere in the Blackwood family medical history. The doctors assumed it must have come from some distant ancestor." She paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because that disorder runs in my family," I said quietly. "In Ellen Williams's family, to be precise. Ellen is a carrier too. I know because she was tested when Chloe was born." Victoria's frown deepened. "Ellen Williams? I know her. She works as a paralegal at Thompson & Miller. What does she have to do with anything?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. About the snowstorm, the babies, the moved bassinets, my terrible uncertainty. About my decades of suspicion. About the DNA tests, not just between Chloe and Victoria, but between Ellen and both girls, that had just confirmed those suspicions. About Chloe's leukemia and her need for a bone marrow donor. I pulled out printed copies of both DNA test results, official documents from GeneTrust DNA Services. "These are maternity tests," I explained, sliding them across her desk. "This one shows that Chloe is not Ellen's biological daughter. This one shows that you are Ellen's biological daughter." Victoria picked up the papers with shaking hands. She read them slowly, carefully, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she stood and walked to the window, her back to me. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. "You're telling me," she said finally, her voice tight with controlled emotion. That I'm not actually a Blackwood? That my parents, the people who raised me, who loved me, who gave me Mepin, are not my biological parents. Biologically, no, I said gently. But in every other way that matters, they were your parents. They loved you. They raised you. They were your family. And this woman, Chloe, she's the Blackwood's biological daughter. My brother Matthew is actually her brother, not mine. Yes, I said. And he might be able to save her life, if he's a match for the bone marrow donation. Victoria turned back to me, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Shock, anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Why should I believe any of this? You could be making it all up. These test results could be forged. I have the official case numbers, I said. You can call Gene Trust directly to verify them. And if you need more proof, we can run more tests through your own physician. But deep down, I think you know I'm telling the truth. Haven't there been moments when you felt different from your family? When you couldn't understand where certain traits came from? She didn't answer, but I could see the recognition in her eyes. The carrier status for that blood disorder. Perhaps other small things she'd noticed over the years, but dismissed. The way she was left-handed when both Diana and James had been right-handed. The way she loved to read when neither of them had been particularly bookish. Small things that suddenly made sense. I need to think, she said finally. This is too much to process all at once. I'll need to verify these results through my own doctor, run independent tests. I understand, I said, standing to leave. But please, think quickly. Chloe doesn't have much time. Her oncologist says without a bone marrow transplant, she has maybe 3 months. Probably less. As I reached the door, Victoria's voice stopped me. Mrs. Williams? I turned back. Yes, this Ellen Williams. She's my biological mother? Yes, I said softly. What is she like? The question caught me off guard. I thought for a moment, wanting to give an honest answer. She's kind, hard-working, smart as a whip. Put herself through community college while raising Chloe alone. Then got her paralegal certification. She loves old movies and makes the best apple pie you've ever tasted. She's the strongest person I know, and she's been a wonderful mother to Chloe. Even though, I trailed off. Even though Chloe isn't biologically hers, Victoria finished. Yes. Victoria nodded slowly, absorbing this. And Chloe, what is she like? She's a 4th-grade teacher. The kids adore her. She has a way of making everyone feel special, important. She volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends, or did before she got sick. She loves to read, especially mysteries. She's patient and kind and brave. My voice broke, and she's dying. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders, a gesture so like Ellen's that it made my heart ache. I'll need to verify your claims, of course. More DNA tests through my own physician. And I'll need to think about how to handle this, especially with my family. But if what you're saying is true, she paused, her jaw tightening. If Matthew can help save this woman's life, I'll speak with him. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Victoria said, her voice hard. If this is true, you stole 56 years from both families. You robbed me of knowing my biological mother, robbed Ellen of raising her biological daughter. That's not something I can easily forgive. I know, I said. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to save Chloe's life. As I left her office, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The truth was finally out, or beginning to come out. But the hardest conversations were still ahead. I still had to tell Ellen and Chloe, and somehow, we all had to find a way to move forward from this revelation that would change everything. Victoria asked for a week to verify my claims and decide how to proceed. She insisted on new DNA tests, more comprehensive than the ones I had arranged through the commercial service. She needed to be absolutely certain before she turned her family's world upside down. She went to her personal physician, Dr. Rebecca Chen, at Springfield Medical Center, and requested both a full DNA maternity test with Ellen, which required Ellen's consent and sample, and a detailed genetic profile comparison. I had to speak with Ellen before Victoria's doctor contacted her to explain everything and ask for her cooperation. That conversation with Ellen was one of the hardest of my life. I drove to her house on a gray Tuesday morning. Ellen was home alone, Bill was at work, and Chloe was at a chemotherapy appointment with Tom. I found Ellen in the kitchen, sorting through medical bills and insurance paperwork. The kitchen table was covered with papers, pill bottles, appointment cards. The weight of Chloe's illness was visible in every corner of the room. "Mom," she said, surprised to see me so early. "What brings you by? Is everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking. "It's important. Very important." She must have heard something in my tone, because she immediately put down the papers and gestured for me to sit. "What is it? You're scaring me." I took a deep breath and began. I told her everything: the snowstorm, the babies, the moved bassinets, my terrible uncertainty that night, about my decades of suspicion, about the birthmark I'd noticed when Chloe was 3 weeks old, about the DNA test I'd secretly conducted, taking her drinking glass and Chloe's hair samples. "I tested your DNA against Chloe's," I said, pulling out the printed results. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Chloe isn't your biological daughter." Ellen stared at me, her face going white. She reached for the paper with trembling hands, read it slowly. "The probability of maternity is 0.00%, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Then she looked up at me, and the betrayal in her eyes cut deeper than any knife. "You've known this might be true for 56 years, she said, her voice rising. "For 56 years, you suspected that my baby wasn't actually mine, and you said nothing." "I wasn't certain," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Not until the test last week. I didn't want to disrupt your lives if I was wrong. I didn't want to." "You didn't want to face the consequences of your mistake," Ellen said, standing up abruptly. "That's what you mean. You were protecting yourself, not me, not Chloe." "You're right," I admitted. "I was a coward. I'm sorry, Ellen. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Ellen's voice broke. "Sorry doesn't give me back 56 years with my biological daughter. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you let me raise another woman's child while my own daughter was growing up across town with strangers." "The Blackwoods weren't strangers," I said weakly. "They were good people. They loved." "I don't care," Ellen shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "They weren't her mother. I was. I should have been." We sat in silence for a long moment, Ellen crying, me crying, both of us drowning in the weight of my decades-old mistake. Finally, Ellen wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "Who is she?" "My biological daughter? Victoria Blackwood Patterson," I said. "She's an attorney. She's married, has 2 children of her own. She's wonderful, Ellen. Smart and successful and strong. You would be proud of her." "I should have raised her," Ellen whispered. "I should have been the one to braid her hair and teach her to ride a bike and help her with homework. That should have been me." "I know," I said. "I robbed you of that. I'm sorry." Ellen looked at me, and I saw decades of our relationship crumbling in her eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Mom. Not right now. Maybe not ever." "I understand," I said. But Ellen continued, her voice hardening with determination. "Chloe is dying, and if there's a chance, any chance, that Victoria's family can help save her, then I'll do whatever it takes, even if it means working with you, even if it means meeting the people who raised my biological daughter." "Victoria's doctor needs a DNA sample from you," I said, "to verify the results independently. Will you consent to that?" Ellen nodded. "If it helps Chloe, yes." "When?" "Dr. Chin will call you tomorrow to schedule an appointment." "Fine." Ellen stood, making it clear that our conversation was over. "You should go now, Mom. I need time to process this." As I walked to my car, I looked back at the house where I'd helped raise Chloe, where I'd spent countless Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. Ellen was standing at the window, watching me leave, and the distance between us felt like an ocean. I had finally told the truth, but the cost might be losing my daughter's love forever. The next 10 days were the longest of my life. Victoria's physician, Dr. Rebecca Chen, ran comprehensive tests, maternity testing, genetic marker analysis, HLA typing for Matthew as a precaution. Ellen went in for her blood draw, as did Victoria. They didn't meet that day. Dr. Chen had scheduled them at different times, sensing that neither woman was ready for a face-to-face encounter. I wasn't allowed at either appointment. Ellen had made it clear she didn't want to see me unless absolutely necessary. Victoria was cordial, but distant when I called to check on the process. I was the architect of this disaster, and both women were making me feel the weight of that responsibility. I visited Chloe daily, watching her grow weaker, as the aggressive chemotherapy ravaged her body in an attempt to kill the cancer cells. She didn't know yet about the DNA tests, or the possibility that Matthew Blackwood might be her biological brother. Ellen had asked me not to say anything until the results were confirmed. "We can't give her false hope," Ellen had said during one of our brief, tense phone conversations. "And we can't tell her about the switch until we're absolutely certain." So I sat with Chloe, brought her soup and magazines, held her hand when the nausea from the chemo became unbearable, and carried the enormous weight of my secret. Tom, her husband, would thank me for coming, never suspecting that I was the reason his wife might not survive. That if I had spoken up 56 years ago, they would have known to look for her biological family from the beginning. Ellen called me every evening with updates about the search for a donor. "The National Registry hasn't found a match yet," she told me one night, her voice increasingly desperate. "The doctor says we're running out of time. They want to try more aggressive chemo if we can't find a donor soon." I wanted to tell her that there was hope, that Matthew was being tested, that the results would be in soon. But I had promised to wait until everything was confirmed. On the 9th day, Victoria called me. "The tests are back," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Dr. Chen has confirmed everything. I am Ellen Williams's biological daughter, and Chloe is Diana and James Blackwood's biological daughter." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me even as fresh guilt settled in my stomach. "And Matthew? He's been HLA type," Victoria said. "Dr. Chen did it as part of the comprehensive testing. Since I explained there was a possibility that someone who might be related to our family needed a bone marrow donor. The results will take a few more days. HLA typing is more complex than simple DNA testing." "Thank you, Victoria." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I'm doing this for Chloe, not for you. And I need you to arrange a meeting. Ellen and Chloe need to be told the full truth, and Matthew deserves to know why he was tested. We should all meet together." "When?" "This weekend. Saturday afternoon at my house. Can you make that happen?" "I'll try," I said. "Don't try, Mrs. Williams. Do it. You owe us all that much." She hung up before I could respond. That evening, I called Ellen. "The tests are confirmed," I said. "Victoria wants to meet with all of us. You, Chloe, me, Victoria, and Matthew. This Saturday." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Chloe needs to be told first, before the meeting. She deserves to hear it from me, not from strangers." "Of course," I said. "Do you want me to be there when you tell her?" Another long pause. "No. This is between me and my daughter. The daughter I raised, even if she's not biologically mine." The next day was Friday. Ellen called me in the evening, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I told Chloe," she said, "about the switch, about Victoria and Matthew, about everything." "How did she take it?" "Better than I did," Ellen admitted. She cried. "Of course, she's scared and confused and angry at you. But she also said," Ellen's voice cracked, "she said that I'll always be her real mother, regardless of biology. That nothing changes how much she loves me." I started crying. "Ellen." "She wants to meet them," Ellen interrupted. Victoria and Matthew. She says if Matthew can help her, she wants to thank him, and she wants to meet the woman who grew up in the life that was supposed to be hers. Then you'll come to the meeting tomorrow? Yes, we'll be there. But Mom? Ellen's voice hardened. After this is over, after we know if Matthew can help Chloe, I need space from you. I need time to figure out how I feel about what you did, about the mother I thought I knew. I understand, I whispered. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, surrounded by decades of family photos that now felt like lies. I had finally told the truth, but the price might be everything I held dear. Tomorrow, the two families, separated by my mistake and brought together by Chloe's illness, would meet for the first time. And somehow, we would all have to find a way forward. Saturday arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood. I drove to Victoria's house in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I arrived early, as Victoria had requested. She answered the door herself, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blue sweater. Behind her I could see her husband Jack and a tall man I recognized as Matthew from photos I'd seen over the years. Mrs. Williams, Victoria said formally. Come in. The living room was beautiful. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, large windows overlooking a well-maintained garden. Family photos adorned the mantel and side tables. I noticed pictures of Diana and James Blackwood, the parents who had raised Victoria, the grandparents who had loved her. My eyes lingered on a photo of a teenage Victoria with her arm around a younger Matthew, both smiling at the camera. This is my husband Jack Patterson, Victoria said, gesturing to a distinguished-looking man in his late 50s. And my brother Matthew. Matthew stepped forward, extending his hand. He had his father James's height and build, his mother Diana's dark brown eyes. Mrs. Williams, he said, his voice neutral but not unkind. Victoria has explained some of what's going on, though I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. I imagine this is a lot to take in, I said quietly. That's putting it mildly, Matthew said. Victoria showed me the DNA results. She says Chloe Mitchell, a woman I've never met, is actually my biological sister, and that Victoria is actually... He trailed off, looking at Victoria with a mixture of confusion and love. I'm still your sister, Victoria said firmly, putting her hand on his arm. Biology doesn't change that. We grew up together. You're my brother in every way that matters. But not by blood, Matthew said. Blood isn't everything, Victoria replied. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Victoria went to answer it, and I heard Ellen's voice, tense and quiet. Then they walked into the living room, Ellen supporting a frail Chloe who leaned heavily on her mother's arm. I barely recognized Chloe. The chemotherapy had taken not just her hair, but seemingly her vitality. She wore a colorful scarf wrapped around her head, and despite the summer warmth, she was bundled in a cardigan. Her face was pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. But when she looked up and saw Matthew, she straightened slightly and managed a small smile. You must be Matthew, she said, her voice weak but steady. Thank you for agreeing to be tested. Whatever the results, thank you for being willing to help a complete stranger. Not a complete stranger, Matthew said gently, moving forward to help Ellen guide Chloe to the sofa. My sister, apparently. My biological sister. Ellen and Victoria stood facing each other, and I saw them both freeze. The resemblance was unmistakable now that they were in the same room. The same green eyes, the same shape of face, the same way of tilting their heads when uncertain. You have my father's chin, Ellen said quietly. And his eyes. I didn't see it before in the photos, but now it's so obvious. Victoria touched her chin, self-consciously. I always wondered where certain traits came from. I have the Blackwood name, but never quite the Blackwood look. No, Ellen said, her voice catching. You have the Williams look. My look. My father's look. They stared at each other for a long moment. Separated by decades of living in the wrong families, yet connected by blood in a way that was suddenly visibly apparent to everyone in the room. Victoria's husband Jack suggested we all sit down, and we arranged ourselves awkwardly. Ellen and Chloe on one sofa, Victoria and Matthew on another, Jack in an armchair. I took a seat in the corner, feeling like the intruder I was. "I think we should start at the beginning," Victoria said, taking charge of the meeting with her lawyer's composure. "Mrs. Williams, perhaps you could explain again what happened that night, for everyone's benefit." So I told the story one more time, from the beginning. The snowstorm, the babies, the moved bassinets, my terrible uncertainty. As I spoke, I watched Matthew's face change from confusion to shock, to a kind of sad understanding. Ellen stared at her hands. Having heard this already, Chloe listened intently, tears streaming down her face. Victoria's expression remained carefully neutral, though I saw her jaw tighten when I described how I'd kept silent for so many years. When I finished, Matthew turned to Chloe. "So we're actually brother and sister? Biologically, I mean." "So it seems," Chloe said, managing a weak smile. "Surprise. And you need a bone marrow donor," Matthew continued. "That's why Mrs. Williams finally came forward with all this." "Yes," I admitted. "Chloe's doctors say a sibling is her best chance for a match." Matthew nodded slowly. "Well, I got tested last week. Dr. Chen said they rushed it because of the urgency of your situation. They should have results by Monday or Tuesday." "Thank you," Chloe said, fresh tears falling. "Whatever the results, thank you for being willing to help." "Of course," Matthew said simply. "You are my sister." Ellen had been silent throughout this exchange, her eyes fixed on Victoria. Finally she spoke. "What was it like, growing up as a Blackwood?" Victoria hesitated, then began to talk. She told Ellen about her childhood, the private schools, the ballet lessons, the family vacations. She talked about Diana and James, about how much they had loved her, how proud they'd been of her accomplishments. She talked about Matthew's birth when she was 3, how thrilled she'd been to have a little brother. "They were wonderful parents," Victoria said. "Loving and supportive. I had every advantage, every opportunity." "I'm glad," Ellen said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I'm glad you were loved and cared for. But," her voice broke, "but you were supposed to be mine. I should have been the one to raise you." Victoria nodded, tears forming in her eyes, for the first time. "I know, and I'm sorry though I know it's not my fault. None of this is your fault, or mine." "No," Ellen said, looking at me. "It's not." The accusation in her eyes was clear, and I accepted it. This was my fault. All of it. "Tell me about Chloe," Victoria said, turning to Ellen. "What was she like growing up?" Ellen's face softened as she began to talk. She told Victoria about Chloe's childhood, the modest home on Maple Street, the public schools, the part-time jobs. She talked about Chloe's love of reading, her determination to become a teacher, her kindness to everyone she met. "She was the easiest child," Ellen said, smiling through her tears. "Sweet and helpful and curious about everything. When she decided she wanted to teach, I wasn't surprised. She was always so good with younger kids, so patient. I had a good life too," Chloe added quietly. "Maybe not with all the advantages Victoria had, but I was loved. Mom worked so hard to give me everything I needed. I never felt like I was missing anything." Ellen took Chloe's hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'd like to know more," Victoria said. "About your life, your family, about the Williams family history. If you're willing to tell me." "I'd like that," Ellen said. "And I'd like to know more about you too. About the woman my daughter became." As they began to talk more freely, I watched the tentative connections forming. Ellen told Victoria about her father, Victoria's biological grandfather, who had died when Ellen was young. About her mother, my late husband Henry, the family traditions we'd maintained. Victoria shared stories about Diana and James, about holidays and family gatherings, about the Blackwood legacy. Matthew and Chloe engaged in their own conversation on the other side of the room. Despite the circumstances, despite the shock, I could see them finding common ground, shared interests, shared mannerisms that genetics had given them, despite being raised apart. I teach fourth grade, Chloe was saying. What do you do? I'm an architect, Matthew replied. Mostly commercial buildings, but some residential work too. My firm did the new library downtown. I love that building, Chloe said, her face brightening. I take my class there for field trips. They discovered other connections, a love of old movies, a talent for crossword puzzles, an irrational fear of clowns that made both of them laugh when they realized they shared it. As the afternoon wore on, I remained in my corner, watching these people brought together by my mistake and by desperate necessity slowly begin to form bonds. Ellen and Victoria, mother and daughter by blood, building a relationship as adults. Matthew and Chloe, siblings who had grown up in different worlds, finding unexpected commonalities. And me, the cause of it all, witnessing the beginning of something that might eventually become healing, though I knew I had no right to be part of it. Finally, as the light began to fade outside the windows, Victoria stood. Thank you all for coming. I know this was difficult, but I think we needed to meet. To see each other as real people, not just as abstract concepts or DNA results. When will we know about the HLA typing? Ellen asked, her practical nature taking over. Dr. Chen said Monday or Tuesday, Victoria replied. She'll call as soon as she has the results. And if Matthew is a match, Chloe asked quietly. Then we move forward with the transplant, Matthew said firmly. Whatever needs to be done. As we prepared to leave, Victoria pulled me aside. The families needed to meet, she said quietly. They need to build relationships, regardless of what happens with the bone marrow testing. But you and I, Mrs. Williams, we're not done. After this is resolved, after we know about Matthew's test results, we need to talk about the consequences of what you did. I understand, I said. I don't think you do, Victoria replied. But you will. I drove home in the gathering darkness, the weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. The truth was out. The families had met, but the real reckoning was still to come. The weekend passed in agonizing slowness. I barely slept, barely ate. Every time my phone rang, my heart would leap, thinking it might be news about Matthew's test results. But it was always something else. A telemarketer, a wrong number, a reminder about a dentist appointment. I wanted to call Ellen to check on Chloe, to see how she was processing everything. But Ellen had been clear that she needed space, so I waited in silence, alone with my guilt and my fear. Monday came and went with no news. I spent the day cleaning my already clean house, trying to keep busy, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Tuesday morning I was in my kitchen making coffee when my phone finally rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. Hello, I answered, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Mrs. Williams, Victoria said, and I could hear the barely controlled emotion in her voice. Dr. Chen just called with Matthew's HLA typing results. My heart stopped. And, he's a match, Victoria said, her voice breaking. A 10 out of 10 HLA match. Dr. Chen says it's the best possible scenario. Matthew and Chloe are perfectly matched at bone marrow transplant. I sat down heavily in the nearest chair, relief so profound it made me dizzy. Oh, thank God! Dr. Chen has already contacted Chloe's oncologist, Dr. Hamilton. Victoria continued, her composure returning. They want to start the process right away. Matthew needs to begin GCSF injections to stimulate stem cell production, and Chloe needs to prepare for the transplant with high-dose chemotherapy to eliminate her existing bone marrow. How soon? They're scheduling everything now. Probably within 2 weeks. Dr. Chen said that, because of the urgency Chloe's cancer is so advanced, they can't afford to wait longer than that. Thank you, Victoria, I said, tears streaming down my face. Thank you for convincing Matthew to be tested. Thank you. Don't, Victoria interrupted. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Chloe. And for Ellen, my biological mother, who I'm just getting to know. But blessed it for Chloe, because she's an innocent victim in all of this, and she deserves a chance to live. I understand. I hope you do, Victoria said. Because after this is over, we need to have a serious conversation about accountability. But for now, we focus on saving Chloe's life. After we hung up, I immediately called Ellen. She answered on the first ring. Mom, she said, and I could hear the desperate hope in her voice. Do you have news? Matthew is a perfect match, I said. 10 out of 10, the transplant can go forward. Ellen broke down crying. I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the line, and I wished desperately that I could be there, could hold her, could comfort her. But that privilege had been revoked by my decades of lies. I need to tell Chloe, Ellen finally managed to say. She's resting upstairs. Oh my God, Mom. She has a chance. She's going to have a chance. Yes, I said softly. She is. Tom just walked in. I need to tell him. I'll call you later. She hung up before I could say anything else. I sat alone in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something like hope. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of medical procedures and preparations. Matthew began his GCSF injections, which stimulated his bone marrow to produce extra stem cells that could be harvested. He reported mild side effects, bone pain, fatigue, headaches, but bore them stoically. It's nothing compared to what Chloe's going through, he told Victoria when she checked on him. Chloe, meanwhile, underwent high-dose chemotherapy to destroy her existing bone marrow, both the cancerous cells and the healthy ones. This was necessary to make room for Matthew's healthy stem cells, but it left her more vulnerable and sick than she'd been at any point in her illness. Ellen stayed with her at the hospital around the clock, sleeping in a chair by her bed, holding her hand through the worst of the nausea and pain. I visited when I could, bringing Ellen changes of clothes, food from home, whatever she needed. Our interactions were brief and businesslike. Ellen was civil but distant, focused entirely on Chloe. I understood. I was there to help, not to be forgiven. Victoria and Matthew visited several times, bringing flowers and books, sitting with Chloe when Ellen needed to step out for a shower or a meal. I watched from the hallway as these biological siblings got to know each other better, their connections growing stronger despite, or perhaps because of the extraordinary circumstances. On the day of the bone marrow harvest, Matthew was taken to a surgical suite. The procedure would extract stem cells from his hip bone, a painful process, but one he'd agreed to without hesitation. She's my sister, he'd said simply when the doctor explained the risks and discomfort. What else would I do? While Matthew was in surgery, we all gathered in a waiting room. Ellen, Tom, Victoria, Jack, me, and several other family members. It was a strange assembly of people who weeks ago had been strangers, now united by blood ties they'd never known existed, and by the shared goal of saving Chloe's life. How long does it take? Ellen asked Victoria, as if proximity to Matthew made her an expert on the medical procedures. A couple of hours, Victoria replied. Then they process the stem cells and prepare them for transplantation to Chloe. And then we wait. The stem cells are infused into Chloe's bloodstream. If all goes well, they'll travel to her bone marrow and begin producing new blood cells. But it takes time, weeks, sometimes months, to know if the transplant was successful. Ellen nodded, processing this information. She looked exhausted, aged by the stress of the past months. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer comfort, but I knew my touch wouldn't be welcome. When Matthew emerged from the recovery room several hours later, groggy but alert, he asked immediately about Chloe. The stem cells are being prepared now, the doctor told him. You did great. We harvested plenty of cells, more than enough for the transplant. Matthew smiled. When can I see Chloe? After the transplant. We don't want you near her right now. You're at risk for infection from the harvest site. And she's completely immunocompromised from the chemotherapy. but in a few days, once you're both stronger, we'll arrange a visit. That evening, Chloe received Matthew's stem cells. It was anticlimactic in a way, just an IV bag hanging on a pole, clear fluid dripping into her veins through a central line. But that bag contained hope. It contained life. Matthew's healthy bone marrow stem cells, flowing into his biological sister's body, beginning their journey to her bone marrow, where they would hopefully take root and begin producing healthy blood cells. Ellen held Chloe's hand throughout the infusion, tears streaming down her face. Tom stood on the other side of the bed, his hand on Chloe's shoulder. I watched from the doorway, not quite part of the family tableau, but present nonetheless. "Thank him for me," Chloe whispered, her voice weak. "Thank Matthew." "You can thank him yourself," Ellen said. "When you're stronger. When you've beaten this." "When I've beaten this," Chloe repeated, as if saying it could make it true. The weeks after the transplant were difficult. Chloe had to stay in a sterile hospital room, isolated from most visitors to protect her from infection. Her immune system was essentially non-existent, destroyed by the chemotherapy, and not yet rebuilt by Matthew's stem cells. A simple cold could kill her at this stage. Ellen and Tom were allowed in, fully gowned and masked. Victoria was permitted a brief visit, and Matthew came once he was fully recovered from the harvest procedure. I watched through the glass window as he sat by Chloe's bed, talking with her, making her laugh despite her weakness. I wasn't allowed in the room. Hospital policy limited visitors to immediate family, and Ellen hadn't pushed for an exception to be made for me. I understood. I stood outside the glass, looking in at the granddaughter I loved, biologically mine or not, and hoped desperately that Matthew's gift would save her life. The doctors monitored Chloe's blood counts daily, looking for signs that the new stem cells were engrafting, taking root in her bone marrow, and beginning to produce blood cells. For the first week there was no change. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, her white blood cell count began to rise. "It's working," Dr. Hamilton told Ellen one morning, and I saw my daughter's face transform with hope. "The engraftment is starting. Matthew's cells are beginning to produce new blood cells in Chloe's bone marrow." Over the next several weeks, Chloe's blood counts continued to improve. Her immune system was slowly rebuilding itself, cell by cell, all of them carrying Matthew's DNA. Her brother's genetic material now a permanent part of her body. She was released from the hospital after 5 weeks, though she still had to be careful about exposure to germs and crowds. She came home to Ellen's house, where a room had been prepared for her, thoroughly cleaned, stocked with medical supplies, set up for the long recovery ahead. During this time, the relationship between our two families continued to evolve. Ellen and Victoria met regularly for lunch, sometimes with Chloe when she was feeling strong enough, sometimes just the two of them. They were navigating a unique relationship, not quite mother-daughter in the traditional sense, since Victoria was in her 50s and had been raised by Diana and James Blackwood, but something equally meaningful. Victoria began researching her Williams family heritage, discovering distant cousins and family stories that explained certain traits and tendencies she had always possessed. She learned that her love of music came from Ellen's father, who had been an accomplished pianist, that her quick temper was a Williams trait, inherited through generations. Ellen, in turn, learned about the Blackwood family, the businesses they'd built, the charitable foundations they'd established, the legacy that Chloe was biologically part of, even though she'd never known it. Matthew and Chloe had formed a special bond through the transplant experience. "My cells, your body," he joked during one visit. "We're literally blood siblings now." And indeed, there was truth to that. Matthew's stem cells had completely replaced Chloe's bone marrow. Her blood type had changed from O positive to A positive. Matthew's blood type. In a very real sense, his DNA was now flowing through her veins, keeping her alive. Ellen's anger toward me had softened somewhat, though there remained a distance between us that hadn't been there before. She was civil, even warm at times, but the unquestioning trust that had characterized our relationship for decades was gone. I couldn't blame her. I had kept a life-altering secret from her for 56 years. had only revealed it when Chloe's life was at stake. Some betrayals cut too deep for complete healing. Victoria had been surprisingly forgiving, considering everything. I had a good life with the Blackwoods, she told me during one of our few direct conversations. They loved me, gave me every opportunity. I can't be angry about that, even if it wasn't the family I was born to. They were wonderful people, I agreed, relieved by her grace. And Ellen is a remarkable woman, Victoria continued. I see myself in her in so many ways. The stubbornness, the determination, the way we both talk with our hands when we're excited. But I don't regret my life with the Blackwoods. In a strange way, I've been fortunate. I've had 2 mothers, 2 families. Her generosity of spirit humbled me. She had every right to be furious with me for depriving her of her biological family, yet she had chosen to see the positive aspects of the situation instead. Only Chloe seemed to have fully forgiven me. Perhaps facing death had given her a different perspective on mistakes and forgiveness. Or perhaps it was simply her nature. She had always had a generous heart, even as a child. You know what's funny, Grandma, she said one afternoon, as I helped her sort through clothes during one of my visits to Ellen's house. She was stronger now, able to walk short distances, though she still tired easily. I used to wonder why I was so different from Mom, from Ellen I mean. She's so organized and practical, and I'm always losing things, always daydreaming. Now I know I get that. From Diana Blackwood. Matthew says she was the same way. Diana was a dreamer, I confirmed, remembering the elegant woman who had given birth to Chloe all those years ago. Always had her head in the clouds, according to the nurses who knew her. It's strange but comforting, knowing these things about myself that never made sense before, Chloe said. Like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. 3 months after the transplant, Chloe's doctors declared her officially in remission. The cancer was gone, at least for now. The new bone marrow from Matthew had taken root and was producing healthy blood cells. Her immune system was rebuilding. She was healing. We celebrated with a small gathering at Ellen's house, just the immediate family, including Victoria and Matthew, who had become fixtures in our lives by then. It was strange, but also beautiful. This blended family that had emerged from my terrible mistake. As we sat around Ellen's dining table, the conversation turned to the future. Chloe was planning to return to teaching in the fall, though only part-time at first. Victoria's daughter Emma was starting college. Matthew's oldest son was getting married in the spring. We should all be there, Ellen said, when Matthew mentioned the wedding. If that's all right with you and Susan, of course. Matthew looked surprised but pleased. We'd love that. Jack and Emily have been asking about Chloe and Tom anyway. They're quite taken with their new aunt and uncle. One big happy family, Chloe said, raising her glass of sparkling cider in a toast. Brought together by a hospital mix-up and a life-threatening illness. Just your typical American family story. Everyone laughed, and I marveled at how far we had come. From the shock and anger of the initial revelation to this, a blended family, finding its way forward together. But I knew the reckoning Victoria had promised was still coming, and it arrived sooner than I expected. 6 months after the successful bone marrow transplant, our newly blended family had settled into a new normal. Chloe's health continued to improve, her energy gradually returning. She had started teaching again, part-time at first, then full-time as her strength allowed. The children in her class welcomed her back with handmade cards and drawings, their love a testament to the impact she'd had on their lives. The relationship between our 2 families continued to deepen. Ellen and Victoria met weekly for lunch, their conversations ranging from family history to current events to the simple day-to-day details of their lives. They were building something unique, not the mother-daughter relationship they'd missed out on, but an adult friendship rooted in blood and growing affection. Matthew and Chloe had formed a bond that went beyond biology. The transplant had literally connected them, his cells flowing through her body keeping her alive, but their relationship was built on more than that. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company, discovering shared interests and complementary personalities. Matthew's wife Susan had welcomed Chloe and Tom into their family with open arms, and soon the two couples were spending time together beyond the medical appointments and family gatherings. Ellen's anger toward me had cooled somewhat, but there remained a careful distance between us. She was polite, even affectionate at times, but the easy intimacy we'd once shared was gone. I understood. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. I was grateful for whatever relationship she was willing to maintain. After dinner one evening at a family gathering, Victoria approached me with an unexpected request. We were at her house. These gatherings rotated between homes now, and most of the family had moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. Victoria gestured for me to follow her into her study. "I want to ask you something," she said, closing the door behind us. "I'd like to record our family's story, the whole thing. The snowstorm, the babies, the discovery decades later. With your permission, of course." I was surprised. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because it's important," she said simply. "Not just for our families, but for others. Hospital identification procedures have improved since 1968. But mistakes still happen. Babies are still switched occasionally, though it's rare now. And families are complicated. Biological ties, adoptive ties, all the ways we belong to each other. I think our story has something to say about all of that." She walked to her desk and pulled out a folder. "I've been doing some research. There have been other cases of switched babies over the years. Some discovered quickly, some not until decades later like ours. Each family handles it differently, some with lawsuits and bitterness, some with grace and understanding. I think our story falls somewhere in the middle, and there's value in that complexity." I considered her request. The thought of my mistake being documented, perhaps shared beyond our families, was daunting. But there was wisdom in what Victoria was suggesting. "What would this involve?" I asked. "Interviews with everyone involved. You, Ellen, Chloe, Matthew, me. I'd want to hear everyone's perspective on what happened and how it affected them. Then I'd write it as a memoir, our family's memoir. It would be honest about the pain and the mistakes, but also about the healing and unexpected blessings that came from tragedy." "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said finally. "Though I don't come off very well in the story." "You're human," Victoria said. "You made a terrible mistake, yes. But you also came forward when it mattered most, and because of that, Chloe is alive. That's part of the story too. The mistake and the redemption, the silence and the truth. All of it matters." Over the next several months, Victoria conducted interviews with each of us. She spoke with Ellen about her life raising Chloe, about the shock of discovering the truth, about the anger and eventual acceptance. She interviewed Chloe about growing up feeling different from her family, about her cancer diagnosis, about meeting Matthew and gaining a biological brother who saved her life. Matthew talked about his childhood with Victoria, about learning he had another sister, about the decision to donate bone marrow without hesitation. Victoria interviewed herself in a way, recording her own thoughts and feelings about discovering she'd been raised by the wrong family, about meeting her biological mother as a middle-aged woman, about the complicated emotions that came with loving both the family that raised her and the family she was born to. And she interviewed me. Those sessions were the hardest, sitting across from Victoria in her study, a recording device between us as I recounted my decades of silence and cowardice. But Victoria was a skilled interviewer, asking questions that forced me to examine my motivations, my fears, my justification. "Why didn't you speak up immediately?" she asked during one session. "That night, when you realized you might have mixed up the babies?" I thought carefully before answering. "Fear," I said finally. "Fear of losing my job, of being sued, of devastating Ellen. And shame, deep, overwhelming shame at having made such a catastrophic error." But the fear and shame didn't go away over the years. Why not speak up later, when the babies were a year old, 5 years old, 10 years old? Because with each passing year, it became harder, I admitted. The longer I waited, the more devastating the revelation would be. And there was always the possibility that I was wrong, that my memory had failed me, that the babies had been in the right places all along. It was easier to believe that than to face the truth. Even when you noticed the birthmark on Chloe, when you saw Victoria's green eyes, so like Ellen's, even then, I told myself it was coincidence, that birthmarks can come from either parent, that eye color can skip generations. I found ways to explain away every piece of evidence, because the alternative, accepting that I had switched those babies, was too terrible to face. Victoria was silent for a moment, the recording device capturing the quiet. Then, "What's changed? What finally made you come forward?" "Chloe's cancer," I said simply. "When she needed a bone marrow donor and the family wasn't matching, I knew. I knew that if my suspicions were correct, Matthew Blackwood might be her only chance. And I realized that my silence, my years of cowardice, might cost her her life. That was a price I couldn't accept. Not anymore." "So you came forward to save Chloe's life?" "Yes. And to finally, after 56 years, do the right thing. Even if it was far too late." Victoria worked on the book throughout that year, writing and rewriting, showing drafts to all of us for feedback and corrections. She titled it, "The Bracelet," simple, but evocative of the hospital identification that should have kept the babies with their biological families. The manuscript was finished by early fall. Victoria had found a publisher, a small press that specialized in memoirs and family stories. The book would be published the following spring. "Are you nervous about it being out in the world?" Ellen asked Victoria during one of their weekly lunches, which I'd been invited to join, a sign that Ellen was slowly rebuilding trust. "A little," Victoria admitted. "But I think it's important, not just for us but for others who might be struggling with questions of identity, with secrets, with finding their way forward after difficult truths come to light." "I think it will help people," Chloe added. She joined us for lunch, looking healthy and strong, her hair growing back in soft curls. It helped me reading it, seeing everyone's perspective, and learning how complicated and painful it was for everyone involved. "Even you, Mrs. Williams?" Victoria asked, turning to me. "Are you comfortable with the book being published?" I thought about it. The book was honest about my mistakes, my cowardice, my decades of silence. But it was also fair, presenting my humanity alongside my failures. And Victoria was right. The story needed to be told. "Yes," I said. "I'm comfortable with it. If our family's story can help even one person, one family dealing with similar secrets or discoveries, then it's worth it." Ellen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact with me since learning the truth. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said, "for agreeing to this, for being willing to face the consequences of what you did." That moment, sitting in that restaurant with my daughter, my biological granddaughter, and the woman who should have been my granddaughter, felt like a kind of absolution, not complete forgiveness, perhaps, but acceptance, a way forward. 1 year after the successful bone marrow transplant, our newly blended family gathered at Lakeside Park for a celebration. It was Chloe's idea, an alive day party to mark both her recovery and the anniversary of our families discovering each other. The weather cooperated beautifully, a perfect September afternoon, with golden sunlight filtering through the trees. Matthew and his sons set up volleyball nets, while Victoria and Ellen arranged food on picnic tables. Chloe, now fully recovered and back to teaching full-time, chased her young nieces and nephews around the playground, her energy completely restored. Watching them all together, the Williams and the Blackwoods, now irrevocably connected by blood, by choice, and by shared experience, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My terrible mistake had caused pain and confusion. Yet, but it had also, in this strange way, expanded our family, enriched all our lives. Victoria approached, handing me a glass of lemonade. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, echoing Ellen's question from months ago. "Just thinking about family," I replied. "About how it's both simpler and more complicated than we think." She nodded, following my gaze to where Chloe and Matthew were organizing a three-legged race, laughing as they demonstrated how it worked. Their similar mannerisms were obvious now that we knew to look for them. The same tilt of the head when listening, the same expressive hand gestures when speaking. "The book is finished," Victoria said after a moment. "The final edits are done. It will be in bookstores next April." "Are you nervous about it?" I asked. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly excited. I think it turned out well. Honest and painful in places, but also hopeful. It shows that families can be made and remade, that mistakes don't have to define us forever." "Thank you," I said, "for being fair to me in the book. You could have portrayed me as a monster and it would have been justified." "You're not a monster," Victoria said. "You're a person who made a terrible mistake and then compounded it by staying silent. But you're also the person who finally came forward, who helped save Chloe's life. Both things are true." Ellen joined us carrying a plate of watermelon slices. "What are you two conspiring about over here?" she asked, her tone light. "The book," Victoria replied. "It's finished." Ellen nodded. "Good, it's a story worth telling." The relationship between Ellen and Victoria had evolved over the past year into something beautiful and unique. Not quite mother-daughter. Victoria was in her 50s after all. Long past needing mothering, but a deep friendship pickled on shared DNA and a growing understanding of each other. They met regularly, sometimes bringing old photos to share, sometimes just talking about their lives. Ellen had eventually come to forgive me, or at least to make peace with what I had done. "I can't change the past," she had told me during a difficult conversation some months after the truth came out. "And holding on to anger won't help anyone, least of all me. What's done is done. We can only move forward from here." Her forgiveness was a gift I hadn't dared hope for, one I knew I didn't deserve, but I accepted it gratefully, determined to spend whatever years I had left being worthy of her trust once more. Matthew called everyone to gather for a group photo. We assembled on the grassy hill overlooking the lake. Ellen and Bill, Chloe and Tom, Victoria and Jack, Matthew and Susan, all their children, and me, two families that had become one, arranged in a large semicircle as Matthew set up the camera timer and rushed to join us. "Everyone say family," he called. "Family," we chorused as the camera flashed. The photo captured us all, smiling, connected, whole. Later when I saw the printed version, I would marvel at how natural we looked together, as if we'd always been one family instead of two families joined by accident and necessity. Later, as the sun began to set and the party wound down, Chloe pulled me aside to a quiet spot by the lake. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Tom and I have decided to adopt." "Adopt?" I repeated, surprised. She nodded. "The cancer treatments, they affected my fertility. The doctors say I probably can't have biological children. But Tom and I still want a family. So we're adopting a baby girl from China. She'll be here in about 6 months." "Oh, Chloe," I said, tears filling my eyes. "That's wonderful news." "We're naming her Hope," Chloe continued. "Because that's what this year has taught me. That hope can survive even the darkest circumstances. That families can be made in all sorts of ways. That biology matters but love matters more." I hugged her too, moved to speak. This child from across the world would join our already unconventional family, adding another layer to our complex tapestry of connection. "I want you to be part of her life, Grandma," Chloe said. "I know things have been complicated this year, with the truth coming out and Mom being angry at you. But you're still my grandmother. You raised me, loved me, were there for all the important moments of my life. That doesn't change." "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more to me than you know." As we drove home that evening, the car filled with leftover food and memories of a perfect day, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A snowy night, a tired nurse, 2 babies, a mistake, cancer, revelation, reunion, healing, and now, a new baby coming from halfway around the world to join our family. There's a reason they put bracelets on babies born in hospitals. I am that reason. My mistake changed the course of many lives. But what began in error had transformed, over time and with love, into something beautiful. A family expanded rather than divided, connections made rather than lost. It wasn't the path any of us would have chosen, but it was ours, and we were walking it together, step by step, into a future none of us could have imagined, on that snowy night, so long ago. Spring, 1 year later. Hope Williams Mitchell arrived on a warm May afternoon, carried off the plane by Chloe and Tom after their journey to China. She was 10 months old, with bright dark eyes and a curious expression that took in everything around her. The whole family was at the airport to meet them: Ellen and Bill, Victoria and Jack, Matthew and Susan with their children, and me. We held signs and balloons, a ridiculous display that made other travelers smile as they passed. When Chloe emerged from the customs area, Hope in her arms, we all surged forward. But Chloe came to me first. "Grandma," she said, "meet Hope." I looked into the baby's face, at this child who had traveled thousands of miles to become part of our family, and felt something shift in my chest. Hope reached out a small hand and grasped my finger, holding on tight. "Hello, little one," I whispered. "Welcome home." Ellen stood beside me, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect," she said, touching Hope's soft cheek. "Absolutely perfect." Victoria and Matthew crowded in too, along with all the other family members. Hope looked around at all these faces, her family though she didn't know it yet, and rather than crying at the crowd, she smiled. "She's a brave one," Matthew said, grinning. "She's going to fit right in with this crazy family." We celebrated Hope's arrival with a party at Chloe's house, the same house where I'd told Ellen the truth about the switch, where we'd navigated the difficult months of Chloe's treatment. Now it was filled with laughter and joy, with the sound of children playing and adults talking, with the chaos of family. Victoria's book, The Bracelet, had been published a month earlier. It had received positive reviews and steady sales, resonating with readers who saw their own family complications reflected in our story. Victoria had done several interviews, always emphasizing that the book wasn't just about our family, but about the many ways families are formed, broken, and reformed. "I've gotten letters," Victoria told me at the party, as we watched Hope being passed from relative to relative, each person eager to hold her, from people who discovered they were adopted late in life, from families dealing with DNA surprises, from parents navigating open adoptions. "They say the book helped them feel less alone." "I'm glad," I said. "If something good can come from my mistake, then it's worth it." "You know," Victoria said thoughtfully, "I don't think of it as just your mistake anymore. Yes, you mixed up those babies, and yes, you stayed silent when you shouldn't have. But look what's come of it. Chloe is alive because Matthew was her biological match. Ellen and I have found each other. Two families have become one. Would any of that have happened without that night in the—" "No," I admitted. "But surely you would have preferred to grow up with your biological mother in your rightful family." Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching Ellen help Chloe adjust Hope's dress. "I don't know," she said finally. "I had a wonderful childhood with the Blackwoods. They loved me completely. And now I have Ellen too, a second mother in a way. I've been fortunate to have two families love me. Not everyone can say that." Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, the core family gathered in Chloe's living room. Ellen and I sat on the couch, Hope sleeping peacefully in Ellen's arms. Chloe and Tom were in the armchairs, exhausted but happy. Victoria and Matthew sat on the floor, their easy sibling relationship evident in the way they teased each other. "Can you believe we didn't know each other a year and a half ago?" Matthew mused. "Now I can't imagine family gatherings without you all." "I was thinking the same thing," Chloe said. "When I was sick before the truth came out, I felt so alone, like I was facing this monster by myself, with just Mom and Tom. Now I have this whole extended family, biological and otherwise." "You were never alone," Ellen said softly, looking down at Hope. Even when we didn't know the truth, you were surrounded by people who loved you. And now Hope will grow up with all this love too, Chloe added. She'll have grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. She'll never wonder if she belongs, because she'll be at the center of this big, complicated, beautiful family. Victoria pulled out her phone. I want to take a picture, she said. For the archives. For Hope. So someday, when she's old enough to understand, she can see where she came from. We arranged ourselves around Ellen and the sleeping baby. The photo Victoria took showed something remarkable. People of different ages and backgrounds, connected by blood and choice and circumstance, united in love for this child who had joined us from halfway around the world. That night, before bed, I took out the photograph Matthew had taken at the park a year ago, all of us together, smiling in the golden afternoon light. I placed it next to the new photo of us with Hope. 2 moments, separated by a year, showing the continued evolution of our family. I thought about that snowy night in December 1968, when I had mixed up those 2 babies and set in motion everything that followed. The fear and shame I'd carried for decades. The silence that had nearly cost Chloe her life. The revelation that had shattered and then reformed 2 families. There's a reason they put bracelets on babies born in hospitals. I am that reason. But I am also the reason 2 families discovered each other. The reason Chloe found her biological brother who saved her life. The reason Ellen met her biological daughter and formed a meaningful adult relationship with her. The reason Matthew and Chloe connected as siblings despite being raised worlds apart. My mistake was real, and the pain it caused was real. But the love that grew from that mistake, the family that formed in its aftermath, that was real too. In my Bible, I still kept the newspaper clipping of Victoria winning her piano competition all those years ago. Now, next to it, I placed a photo of her sitting at Chloe's piano, teaching Hope to press the keys with her tiny fingers. Past and present, loss and gain, mistake and redemption, all woven together in the complicated tapestry of family. That night, I wrote in my journal, at 87 years old, I have learned that families are not defined solely by blood or by law, but by love and choice, and the willingness to stay connected even when it's difficult. I made a terrible mistake 56 years ago, and I compounded it by staying silent. But in the end, that mistake led to this. A family expanded and enriched. 2 separate families becoming one. Hope will grow up with more grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins than she can count. She will grow up surrounded by love, and perhaps that is my redemption, not that I am forgiven, but that something beautiful grew from my greatest failure. I closed the journal and placed it on my bedside table, next to the photos. Outside, the spring night was peaceful. Somewhere across town, Hope was sleeping in her new home, surrounded by family who would love and protect her. Chloe was alive and healthy. Ellen had found her biological daughter. Matthew and Victoria had gained siblings they never knew they had. There's a reason they put bracelets on babies born in hospitals. I am that reason. But I am also the reason this family exists in its current form. Complicated, blended, imperfect, but real. And that, I've learned, is enough. The box in the attic had revealed secrets that could have destroyed us. Instead, it set us free.